The last hour before glory always felt the most fragile. Chloe Evans stood in the center of their cavernous living room, the city of Chicago spread below them like a carpet of shattered diamonds. From their penthouse on the 87th floor of the St. Regis, Lake Michigan was a vast, inky void that mirrored the twilight sky. Inside, the light was warm, golden, and meticulously controlled, just like everything else in their lives. Chloe adjusted the silk bow tie at her husband's throat, her fingers moving with the practiced ease of a decade spent perfecting his image. Mark Evans stood patiently, a marble statue of a man, his gaze fixed on his own reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Perfect," she murmured, smoothing the lapels of his custom Tom Ford tuxedo. "You look every bit the man of the year." Mark offered a tight, distracted smile. "It's not about the look, Chloe. It's about the work, the foundation, the legacy." He said the words like a mantra, a script he had memorized for the press. He was always performing. "I know," she said, her voice soft. "And no one has worked harder." It was true. She had been there, a silent partner in his relentless climb. She'd managed their social calendar, vetted his speeches, and hosted countless dinners where she smiled until her face ached, all to build the myth of Mark Evans, the benevolent real estate mogul. She had put her own career, a promising start in architectural history, on indefinite hold to become the architect of his public life. For 10 years, his success had been her project. He turned from the window, finally giving her his full attention. His eyes, the color of a summer sky, held a magnetic charm that could disarm a boardroom or captivate a ballroom. "I couldn't have done any of this without you. You know that, right?" Chloe's heart gave a familiar flutter. This was her reward. These brief, shining moments when he seemed to see her, not just as an accessory, but as his anchor. "I know, Mark." He was already moving again, pacing the length of the Persian rug. "The mayor is speaking first. Then Catherine from the Children's Hospital Board. They expect my speech to be around 10 minutes. Humble but firm, grateful but visionary." "You'll be brilliant," she assured him, picking a stray piece of lint from his shoulder. "You always are." His work phone, a sleek black monolith, buzzed on the marble console table. He glanced at the screen. "It's the limo. I have to get down there. A quick pre-event interview with the Tribune. I'll meet you at the hotel." He kissed her cheek, a brief dry press of lips. "Don't be late. I want you front and center when they call my name." He strode toward the door, grabbing his overcoat. As the heavy oak door clicked shut, a profound silence descended on the apartment. It was a silence she was used to, the quiet left in the wake of his whirlwind energy. She took a deep, steadying breath, the scent of his expensive cologne lingering in the air. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel it, a pure, uncomplicated surge of pride. This was their victory. She turned to gather her clutch and wrap from the sofa. That's when she saw it. Lying beside a stack of art books on the console table was a second phone, a silver iPhone with a dark leather case. His personal phone. He was usually so careful with it, a digital extension of his private self that was rarely out of his sight. In his rush, he must have forgotten it. With a small sigh, she picked it up, intending to slip it into her purse. She'd give it to him at the gala. But as her fingers closed around it, the screen lit up. A single insistent buzz vibrated through her hand. A text message. The name on the screen made her breath catch. Ashley, her sister's name. Chloe frowned. Why would Ashley be texting Mark's personal phone an hour before the biggest night of his career? She knew they were both to be at the event. Another buzz. "Ashley, you're going to be amazing tonight." Chloe's fingers tightened on the phone. An innocent message of support, she told herself. Ashley adored Mark, but a cold knot was forming in her stomach. A third buzz, immediate and urgent. "Ashley, can't wait to see you on that stage tonight, my man of the year. Soon everyone will know. Wait to see you on that, my man of the year." The words echoed in the silent room, suddenly sinister. Soon everyone will know. Know what? Chloe's heart began to hammer against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. Her hands trembled. Not from cold, but from a sudden, visceral dread. This was a door she had never even known existed, and she knew with terrifying certainty that if she opened it, she could never go back. She could leave it. She could put the phone in her purse, walk out the door, and go play the part of the proud, supportive wife. But the finality of that last message, the possessive, triumphant tone of it, was a hook that had already dug deep into her soul. Her thumb hovered over the screen. His passcode was their anniversary. It had always been their anniversary. With a slow, deliberate movement that felt both like a betrayal and an act of self-preservation, she typed in the 6 numbers. The phone unlocked. The screen opened to a thread of messages stretching back not days or weeks, but months. Years. A secret, parallel life lived in glowing text and stolen images right under her nose. Chloe sank onto the arm of the nearest sofa, her legs no longer able to support her. The blood pounded in her ears, a dull, rhythmic roar that almost drowned out the sound of her own ragged breathing. She scrolled upwards, her thumb moving with a life of its own. It wasn't just flirting. It was an entire relationship, meticulously documented. Mark. God, I needed to see you today. Her charity lunch was excruciating. Ashley, I was thinking about you the whole time. Remember that hotel in Napa? Let's go back next month. I'll make an excuse. Chloe's vision blurred. They had all gone to Napa for her birthday 2 years ago. While she was touring a vineyard with her parents, they were... She scrolled further, a fresh wave of nausea rising in her throat. There were pictures. A selfie of Ashley, wrapped in a hotel bathrobe that Chloe recognized as Mark's, her smile sly and victorious. A picture of Mark's hand intertwined with Ashley's on a sun-drenched cafe table. The texts were filled with a casual cruelty that felt like acid on her skin. They dissected her, critiqued her, and dismissed her. Ashley, is she wearing that gray dress again tonight? She looks so drab in it. Mark, let her. Makes you shine even brighter, my love. My love. He hadn't called Chloe that in years. He called her honey, sweetheart, a series of affectionate, empty placeholders, the intimacy she had craved, the private language of a marriage. He had been speaking with her sister all along. Her own sister, who had cried on her shoulder after a breakup last spring, who had helped Chloe pick out her dress for this very gala. It was a betrayal so profound, so complete, it defied comprehension. Her gaze fell on the most recent exchange, the one from just minutes ago. Ashley, can't wait to see you on that stage tonight, my man of the year. Soon everyone will know. Mark. Patience, Ash. The timing has to be perfect. After tonight, everything changes. I promise. The promise wasn't for her. It was for Ashley. Tonight wasn't the culmination of their life together. It was the prelude to its destruction. The award wasn't a shared victory. It was his launching pad into a new life with her sister. The cold dread that had been seeping into her bones now froze her solid. She felt hollowed out, a fragile shell of the woman who had adjusted his bow tie only 10 minutes ago. As if summoned by the thought, the screen on Mark's personal phone flickered off, and a different sound cut through the silence. Her own phone, buzzing from her clutch on the sofa. She stared at it, the caller ID flashing with a picture of Mark, smiling on their last trip to Italy. A ghost from a life that was already dead. She had a choice. She could ignore the call. She could shatter both phones against the marble fireplace. She could scream until the windows cracked. But as the ringing persisted, a strange and terrible calm began to settle over her. The frantic, screaming chaos in her mind went silent, replaced by an arctic stillness. The grief was still there, a massive black hole in her chest, but around its edges, something else was crystallizing. A cold, hard, diamond-sharp resolve. Something else was crystal. She picked up her phone, her hand steady now. She swiped to answer. Hey, darling, she said, her voice impossibly smooth, a perfect replica of her usual tone. Hey, honey. Mark's voice was warm, carefree, crackling slightly from his work phone. Just checking in. The reporter cornered me, but I'm in the limo now. Are you on your way? Chloe glanced at his personal phone, still glowing with betrayal on the cushion beside her. She saw another notification pop up on its screen, a calendar alert for tomorrow afternoon. Private meeting, the Peninsula, the hotel where he had proposed to her, where they had celebrated their first anniversary. The audacity of it, the sheer contempt, stole the last of her breath. She took a slow, deliberate inhale, oxygenating the ice in her veins. She looked at her reflection in the dark window. A pale, drawn woman stared back, her eyes holding a new, dangerous light. The mask of the supportive wife was still perfectly in place, but behind it, a stranger was looking out. "Of course, Mark," she said, her voice laced with a sweetness that felt foreign and powerful on her tongue. "I'm just leaving. I wouldn't miss this for the world." She ended the call and stood up. Her movements were fluid, graceful. She slipped Mark's personal phone into her clutch, a cold, hard piece of evidence against her hip. She checked her makeup in the hall mirror. Not a single smudge, not a tear. She looked perfect. She looked ready. The show, after all, must go on. But she would not be playing the part he had written for her. Tonight, she would be writing her own ending. The ride to the Drake Hotel was only 15 minutes, but inside the plush, leather-scented interior of the town car, time stretched and compressed like a warped accordion. The city lights slid past the tinted windows, blurring into streaks of neon and gold. But Chloe saw none of them. Her world had shrunk to this confined, suffocating space, with the man who was now a stranger. Mark was radiant. He had shed the pre-event tension, and was now fully immersed in the glow of his impending honor. He'd loosened the bow tie she had so carefully straightened, just enough to look roguishly charming. "Can you believe it, Chloe?" he said, his voice booming slightly in the small space. He took her hand, his touch now feeling alien and repulsive. She fought the urge to flinch. "Man of the year. When I started out, I was just a kid from the suburbs with a dream. Now, this." She made a non-committal sound, a soft hum of agreement. Her mind was a maelstrom, replaying the damning texts, superimposing them over his earnest, smiling face. Her charity lunch was excruciating. The memory of that day stabbed at her. She'd been so proud, raising over $100,000 for the women's shelter. She had called him, bubbling with excitement. He had sounded so pleased for her. It was all a lie. "This award, it's not just for me," he continued, completely oblivious to her chilling silence. "It's for us. For everything we've built." He squeezed her hand. "It proves I'm not just some guy who got lucky, Chloe. It proves I'm important." There it was. The raw, desperate core of him, exposed. It was never about the charity, the community, or the legacy. It was about his ego, his insatiable need for validation. He needed the applause, the awards, the adoring wife on his arm, all to fill the cavernous emptiness within him. She and Ashley weren't people to him. They were just different kinds of mirrors, reflecting the image he wanted to see. "You are important, Mark," she said, her voice quiet and even. He beamed, misinterpreting her flat tone as awe. "And your speech tonight, think you'll be okay with that? I know I sprang it on you." He was referring to a call he'd made on his way to the limo, informing her the organizers wanted a surprise from the family, and that he'd volunteered her. At the time, she'd been flustered but touched. Now she understood it was just another part of the performance. "I'll be fine," she said. "I'll just speak from the heart." The lie tasted like ash in her mouth. "I'll just speak." Her heart was a shattered ruin, and the only thing she wanted to speak from it was a scream of pure, unadulterated rage. But she held it in, compressing it into a single point of focused energy. He finally seemed to notice her stillness. He tilted his head, his charming smile faltering for a fraction of a second. "Everything okay, honey?" "You seem a million miles away." This was it. The moment she could break. She could throw his phone at him. She could demand the driver pull over. She could detonate their lives right here in the back of this car. The temptation was immense, a physical pull, but her gaze flickered past him, out the window, to the grand, floodlit entrance of the Drake Hotel coming into view. She saw the swarm of photographers, the red carpet, the waiting crowd. An explosion here would be a private affair. Messy, contained. What he deserved What they deserved was a public reckoning. The punishment had to fit the crime. His crime was the corruption of his public image, so the punishment had to be its public annihilation. She turned her eyes back to his, forcing them to soften. She manufactured the best imitation of a loving gaze she could muster. "Just overwhelmed with pride, Mark," she said, her voice a low, convincing tremor. "Thinking about your speech. About everything you deserve." The double meaning hung in the air between them, thick and potent. But Mark, blinded by his own brilliance, heard only what he wanted to hear. His anxiety vanished, replaced by a look of profound tenderness that was so false it made her stomach clench. "That's my girl," he said, leaning in to kiss her forehead. She didn't pull away. She sat perfectly still, a statue of composure, as his lips brushed her skin. The touch felt like a brand. In her mind, she was no longer Chloe Evans, the supportive wife. She was an instrument of justice, being delivered to the stage. The limo slowed to a stop. The door was opened by a uniformed attendant. A wall of flashing lights and indistinct cheers hit them. Mark squeezed her hand one last time. "Showtime," he whispered, his eyes alight with triumph. Chloe smiled, a slow, deliberate curve of her lips. "Yes," she agreed, stepping out into the blinding glare. "It is!" The transition from the quiet intimacy of the limo to the chaotic theater of the red carpet was jarring. Flashbulbs exploded like miniature supernovas, momentarily bleaching the world white. Voices shouted his name. "Mark, over here! Mark! A picture with your lovely wife." Chloe was on autopilot. She moved to his side, her hand finding the small of his back, a familiar gesture of support that now felt like a strategic placement. She smiled. It was a flawless, empty performance she had perfected over years of galas and fundraisers. Her face felt like a mask, and behind it, she was a cold, calculating observer, cataloging the scene for the memory of its destruction. They flowed from the red carpet into the hotel lobby, a river of admiring glances and handshakes parting for them. "Congratulations, Mark! You deserve this! Chloe, you look stunning! He couldn't do it without you!" Each compliment was a fresh twist of the knife. She simply smiled and nodded, her grace a testament to a lifetime of polite restraint. The grand ballroom was a spectacle of gilded opulence. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls from the frescoed ceiling, casting a warm, shimmering light over hundreds of guests in black tie attire. The air hummed with conversation and the clinking of champagne glasses. It was a room built to celebrate power and success, Mark's natural habitat. As a hostess led them toward the head table on its raised dais, Chloe's eyes scanned the crowd. And then she saw her. Ashley was seated at a prime table near the stage, holding a flute of champagne. She was wearing a stunning, backless crimson dress, a beacon of color in a sea of black and navy. She looked radiant, alive, and utterly triumphant. She wasn't just a guest. She was holding court, laughing with the people at her table, her head tilted back in a gesture of pure, unadulterated confidence. She looked like a woman who had already won. For a terrifying second, Chloe's composure faltered. The sight of her sister, so happy and so central to her own private agony, was a physical blow. She wanted to march over there, to rip that self-satisfied smirk off her face. But then Ashley's eyes met hers across the crowded room. There was no flicker of guilt, no hint of shame. Instead, Ashley raised her glass in a subtle, almost imperceptible toast. It was a gesture of ownership, a silent, insolent claim on the man standing beside Chloe. In that moment, any lingering trace of sisterly love in Chloe's heart turned to dust. This wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness. This was a conquest. The event organizer, a harried-looking woman with a clipboard, intercepted them at the foot of the dais. "Mark, Chloe, you both look incredible. We're just about to get started. Mark, we have you slated to speak right after the mayor's tribute." Mark nodded, his face a mask of magnanimous charm. "Perfect." He then put his arm around Chloe's shoulders, pulling her close. His next words, spoken to the organizer, but directed entirely at her, were the final, perfect piece of his self-laid trap. "And after I speak, he announced, his voice carrying to the nearby tables. "I want to bring my better half up. The real reason I'm here. My wife, Chloe, is going to say a few words." He turned to her, his blue eyes shining with what anyone else would call love. To Chloe, it looked like patronizing pride. "Just speak from the heart, sweetheart. Tell them what a wonderful husband I am." He was handing her the microphone, the stage, the entire rapt audience of Chicago's elite. He was giving her the weapon and telling her exactly where to aim it. The irony was so thick she could have choked on it. He thought he was showcasing his perfect wife, cementing his image as a devoted family man. He had no idea he was orchestrating his own execution. The organizer beamed. "Oh, how wonderful!" The personal touch. "The audience will love it." The world seemed to slow down. Chloe could feel the weight of Mark's arm on her shoulders, the collective gaze of the room, the distant, triumphant glint in her sister's eyes. Every instinct for self-preservation screamed at her to refuse, to feign illness, to run. But the icy resolve born in her silent apartment had now hardened into something unbreakable. She turned her face up to Mark, her expression one of pure, unadulterated adoration. She let a brilliant, loving smile spread across her lips, the most convincing performance of her life. "I would be honored," she said, her voice clear and true. Seated at the head table, Chloe felt like a spectator at her own life. The crisp white linen of the tablecloth was cool beneath her forearms. The silverware gleamed under the chandeliers. To her left, Mark accepted handshakes and whispered congratulations from a stream of well-wishers. To her right, the mayor's wife was asking her about their last trip to Aspen. Chloe answered on instinct, her voice pleasant and her smile fixed, while her mind was a world away. The program began. The host, a local news anchor with a plastic smile, took the stage and launched into a glowing introduction. Then came the speeches. The mayor of Chicago spoke of Mark's civic duty and his vision for revitalizing the city's waterfront. Catherine from the Children's Hospital Board gave a tearful account of Mark's anonymous donation that had funded a new pediatric wing. A corporate sponsor praised Mark's business acumen and, most laughably, his unwavering integrity. Each word of praise was a hot coal pressed against Chloe's skin. Integrity, character, family man, a pillar of the community. The words, once a source of pride, now sounded like a litany of his sins. They were lauding a phantom, a carefully constructed illusion she had helped build and maintain. With every accolade, her resolve didn't just harden, it was forged. She let her gaze drift back to Ashley's table. Her sister was enraptured, leaning forward, her chin propped on her hand as she stared at the stage, at the tribute to her lover. She was absorbing the praise as if it were her own, basking in the reflected glory of the man she was about to claim. As the mayor finished his remarks to a round of thunderous applause, Ashley caught Chloe's eye once more. She smiled, a small, secret smile, and again lifted her champagne flute. This time, the message was unmistakable. Checkmate. A wave of dizziness washed over Chloe. The air in the ballroom suddenly felt too thick to breathe. For a fleeting, panicked moment, she thought, "I can't do this." The sheer scale of the fallout was terrifying. It wasn't just Mark's reputation she would be destroying, but the entire ecosystem of their life. Her in-laws, who adored her, her own parents, who would be shattered by their daughter's war, the public humiliation, the press, the legal battles. It was a future of scorched earth. She pictured her mother's face, always so proud of her two girls. She pictured her father, who had walked her down the aisle and placed her hand in Mark's, telling him to take care of his greatest treasure. The guilt was a physical weight, threatening to crush the anger that had propelled her this far. Then, as if she had conjured it, a single line of text flashed in her mind's eye. A screenshot burned onto her memory. Ashley's text. "Soon everyone will know." They had already made the decision. They had already lit the fuse. The destruction was their plan, not hers. They just intended for her to be the silent, humiliated casualty. They planned to rewrite the narrative with her as the discarded, ignorant wife. The rage, pure and cleansing, surged back, extinguishing the doubt. They didn't deserve a quiet, dignified exit. They didn't deserve to control the story of how her life was torn apart. She wasn't turning on the lights to an intact room. She was simply illuminating the wreckage they had already made. She was no longer composing a speech of revenge. It was a speech of truth, an act of reclamation. She wasn't destroying her life. She was taking it back. She took a sip of ice water, the cold liquid a shock to her system. She focused on the host, who was now returning to the podium. His voice was booming, filled with manufactured excitement. "And now," the anchor declared, "the moment we've all been waiting for. A man whose generosity is matched only by his vision. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for your 2023 Chicago Man of the Year, Mr. Mark Evans." The room erupted. Everyone was on their feet, the applause a deafening roar. Chloe rose with them, her hands clapping together in a slow, measured rhythm. Her eyes were fixed on her husband as he ascended the stage, his face a perfect portrait of humble, gratified success. Mark Evans owned the stage. He moved to the lectern with the easy confidence of a man who believed he was born for the spotlight. He held up his hands, palms out, in a gesture of humble gratitude, waiting for the thunderous ovation to subside. The lights caught the brilliant blue of his eyes, making them shine with sincerity. He was, Chloe thought with a detached sense of wonder, a magnificent fake. "Thank you," he began, his voice resonating with practiced warmth. "Thank you so much. I am deeply humbled." His speech was a masterclass in performance. He spoke of the grit and spirit of Chicago. He told a self-deprecating story about his first failed business venture, earning a warm laugh from the crowd. He spoke with passion about the children at the hospital, his voice catching with emotion at just the right moment. He painted a picture of a man driven not by profit, but by a profound sense of duty to the city that had given him everything. He was a poet of public relations, and this was his masterpiece. "But a man is not an island," he said, his tone shifting to one of intimate sincerity. He turned his gaze from the crowd and settled it directly on Chloe. The entire ballroom followed his lead, and she felt the weight of 500 pairs of eyes. "My greatest achievement, my greatest source of strength, my guiding star, has always been my wife, Chloe." A collective awe rippled through the audience. Chloe's face remained a perfect, serene mask. "She has stood by me through every gamble, every late night, every impossible deadline," Mark continued, his voice thick with emotion. "She is the heart of my life and the soul of my work." Thick with emotion. "Without her, truly, none of this would be possible." He raised the heavy golden award that had been placed on the lectern. "This is not my award. This is our award." He paused, letting the weight of his declaration settle. Then, he opened his arm in a grand, inviting gesture. "Honey, please, come up here." The spotlight swung from him to her, pinning her in its bright, unforgiving glare. The applause started again, an expectant, encouraging wave of sound. This was the moment, the point of no return. Chloe stood. Her movements were not hesitant or rushed. They were deliberate, measured, each step a conscious choice. She walked around the table, down the two shallow steps of the dais, and toward the main stage. The rustle of her silk gown was the only sound she could hear over the pounding in her ears. The faces in the crowd were a blur, indistinct smudges of admiration. She saw only one face clearly, Ashley's. Her sister was watching her ascent with an expression of smug, proprietary pride, as if Chloe were walking up to formally cede the throne. She reached the stage and climbed the steps. Mark met her at the top, his face alight with a triumphant, possessive love. He leaned in and kissed her cheek. The contact was electric, a jolt of ice and fire. It felt like the kiss of Judas. "I love you," he whispered, his breath warm against her ear, the words meant only for her. He pulled back and placed the award in her hands. It was heavier than she'd expected, a solid, gilded weight. It felt like a scepter, or a weapon. Then, with a final beaming smile at the crowd, he gestured for her to take the microphone. Her fingers wrapped around the cool, smooth metal of the mic stand. She adjusted it slightly, the small movement feeling immensely significant. She drew a breath. The applause died down, replaced by a hushed, expectant silence. The entire room was waiting. Mark stood beside her, his hand on the small of her back, a proud king presenting his queen. She looked out over the sea of faces, a vast, anonymous body ready to receive her husband's gospel. She found her sister's eyes one last time. She held her gaze. Then she began to speak. Chloe's voice, when it came, was not the trembling, emotional whisper the audience expected. It was calm, clear, and carried a surprising resonance in the silent ballroom. "Thank you," she began, her eyes sweeping across the room before landing on Mark. She offered him a small, polite smile. "My husband has always been a man who believes in grand gestures." The Mark Evans Pavilion at the Children's Hospital. The Evans Grant for Inner City Arts. The skyline of this city is literally shaped by his ambition. And for that, he deserves our applause. She paused, and the room dutifully, enthusiastically, applauded. Mark squeezed her arm, beaming with pride. He thought this was the perfect opening. "But Mark asked me to come up here and speak from the heart about the kind of man he is," she continued, her voice losing its formal edge and taking on a more intimate, conversational tone. The room leaned in, captivated. Andy's right. Character isn't defined by the grand public gestures that everyone can see. It's defined by the small, private choices that no one is supposed to see. It's about honesty, loyalty. It's about the promises you keep when the only person who will know if you break them is the person you made them to. A subtle shift occurred in the atmosphere. The warmth began to cool. Mark's smile became a little more fixed, a little more strained. He sensed a change in direction, but he couldn't yet see where the road was leading. "Mark Evans, the man of the year, is a master of compartmentalization," Chloe went on, her gaze now direct and unwavering. "He is brilliant at keeping his world separate, his public life, a monument to integrity, and his private life, which is equally impressive in its dedication to a single, long-term project." The silence in the room was now absolute. It was no longer expectant. It was tense, heavy, and uncertain. Every guest was frozen, glasses halfway to their lips, conversations abandoned. Mark's hand on her back had gone rigid. He knew. Abandoned. "You see, for the last 3 years," Chloe said, her voice dropping slightly, but losing none of its clarity. "While building his public legacy, my husband has also been building a secret life. A life of incredible passion and commitment. He has been engaged in a long-term affair." A collective audible gasp swept through the ballroom. It was a physical wave of shock. Mark's face, projected onto the giant screens on either side of the stage, collapsed. The confident smile evaporated, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. He took a half-step toward her, his mouth opening, but no sound came out. Chloe didn't look at him. She looked out at the audience, at the sea of stunned faces. And finally, she let her gaze land, with surgical precision, on her sister. "But I really shouldn't be the one standing up here, accepting this honor on his behalf," Chloe declared, her voice ringing with a terrible final clarity. "His true partner, the woman who has shared his private ambitions and his most secret promises, is in the audience with us tonight." She lifted her hand, not to point, but in a gesture of magnanimous presentation. I believe in giving credit where credit is due, so I'd like to congratulate my sister, Ashley Carter." A new sound rippled through the crowd, a murmur of disbelief and frantic whispers as hundreds of heads turned in unison to find Ashley's table. Ashley herself looked like she had been turned to stone. The crimson of her dress was a brutal contrast to the bloodless white of her face. The triumphant smile was gone, replaced by a rictus of shock and utter humiliation. She was trapped in the spotlight of 500 pairs of eyes. Chloe placed the heavy award deliberately on the lectern. She leaned into the microphone for her final words. "So, please, let's have a round of applause for Ashley. She has worked so hard for this. She has finally won the Man of the Year." Her voice was devoid of malice, a simple statement of fact. "He's all yours." She turned, not sparing a single glance for the ruined man beside her. She placed the microphone gently back in its stand, the click echoing like a gunshot in the cavernous silence. With her head held high, she walked to the edge of the stage, down the steps, and into the aisle. The crowd parted for her as if she were a queen, a sea of shocked, mesmerized faces. She walked the entire length of the grand ballroom, her steps even and unhurried, leaving behind the smoldering wreckage of a life, and walked out the door without looking back. 6 months later, the view from Chloe's window was not of a glittering, man-made skyline, but of the raw, jagged peaks of the Rocky Mountains. The air in her small Denver apartment was thin and crisp, and it smelled of pine and the promise of snow. The scale of the mountains made human ambition seem small, almost foolish. It was a perspective she desperately needed. The divorce was final. The last of the papers had been signed via a video call with her lawyer an hour ago. With a final, decisive click of her laptop, she had severed the last legal tie to Mark Evans. The sound was quiet, almost anticlimactic, but for Chloe, it was the sound of a cage door swinging open. The fallout from that night had been immediate and catastrophic. The Man of the Year's public immolation was the biggest scandal Chicago had seen in a decade. Mark had become a pariah overnight. His carefully constructed empire of goodwill crumbled to dust. He was forced to resign from his foundation's board, and his business partners, terrified of the toxic publicity, began to strategically distance themselves. He had kept the penthouse, but lost the kingdom. He and Ashley were still together, a fact Chloe learned from a single venomous email her sister had sent. They lived in the gilded cage on the 87th floor, a monument to their hollow victory. From what little Chloe heard through mutual acquaintances before she cut all ties, their life was a toxic hell. Mark, stripped of the public adoration he craved, had turned his bottomless resentment on Ashley. The public adoration. She was no longer his shining prize, but a living, breathing reminder of his downfall. She had gotten the man, the apartment, and the life she'd so coveted. But it was a life of infamy, lived in a resentful silence, punctuated by bitter arguments. She was estranged from their parents and had become a social ghost. Chloe felt no satisfaction in their misery. She felt nothing for them at all. They were characters in a book she had finished reading and placed on a high shelf to gather dust. Her own life was smaller now, and infinitely more real. She had sold her share of their assets, taking only what was legally hers and refusing to fight for more. She didn't want his money, she wanted her freedom. She had enrolled in the master's program for architectural preservation at the University of Colorado, reclaiming the passion she had set aside for his ambition. Her apartment was modest, filled with secondhand books and drafts of her thesis on historic mining towns. It was entirely her own. There were hard days, nights when the phantom limb of her old life ached, but those moments were becoming fewer and farther between. They were being replaced by the quiet joy of a lecture that sparked her intellect, the satisfaction of a difficult hike, the simple pleasure of coffee with a new friend who knew nothing of Chloe Evans, the disgraced philanthropist's wife. She walked to the large picture window that dominated her small living room, wrapping her hands around a warm mug of tea. The late afternoon sun was setting the snow-capped peaks ablaze with alpenglow, painting them in hues of orange and pink. It was a beauty that demanded nothing from its audience. It simply was. For 10 years, she had lived her life reflected in the eyes of others, in Mark's approval, in society's admiration. The woman who had walked off that stage 6 months ago had been a creature of pure, reactive fury. The woman standing here now was someone new. She was quieter, stronger, more herself than she had ever been. A genuine smile touched her lips, unforced and unfamiliar. It reached her eyes. The path ahead was uncertain, a trail leading into the vast, beautiful, and unknown wilderness. But for the first time in a very long time, she was the one drawing the map. She took a deep breath of the clean, cold air and looked toward the endless horizon, feeling, finally and completely, free.